Hi, everyone. Welcome to our BCCC webinar, Leading the Change Towards Inclusion in Business, DEI in 2023 and beyond, where we'll learn about our panel with experts about the current scenario of DEI in the Canadian and in the Brazilian markets and the gaps that need to be addressed in the business landscape to shape a more inclusive future in Brazil and in Canada. My name is Raquel Boechat. I'm the co-chair of the Innovation, Science and Technology Committee at BCCC, and I'm the founder of Canada Starthub. Today, I represent BCCC here in this webinar to introduce these amazing speakers. For those who don't know us yet, the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce is a business association with the primary objective of fostering stronger commercial relationship between Brazil and Canada. And this year, we celebrate our 5th anniversary. Yesterday, we had our end-of-the-year cocktail with important recognitions from the Canadian and the Brazilian government for our chamber. The BCCC has 6 operational committees, with which organize and host several events, including this one, in person and online, and bring valuable content and networking with our members. Stay tuned to other activities that we'll be doing and in our newsletter. This webinar is organized by the BCCC Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and as part of our organizational culture, we always start our events with the land acknowledgement and diversity statement. We would like to acknowledge that this land where we are is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe Chippewa people, home of the Métis, and most recently the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. Together, we also stand as leaders embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion. We recognize that DEI is not just the right thing to do, but essential for our organizational success. We lead the change, understanding that diversity and inclusion practices must permeate all aspects of our business. It's not a standalone initiative, nor confined of HR policies alone. By weaving D&I into a fabric of our organizations, we cultivate an environment where every individual thrives, innovations flourish, and collective potentials is realized. With unwavering commitment, we engage with our employees and foster real and sustainable change. Let us forge ahead, united in our mission to create a diverse and inclusive future that transcends boundaries and elevate us all. Well, without further ado, I am very happy to be here and introduce this webinar. We are pleased to have today our moderator, Jeniffer Cooke, Director of Inclusive Trade at EDC, and great panelists, Laura Methot, Managing Director of IND 101, and Clara Schneider, founder of Sondery Accessibility Creativa. Jeniffer, Anna, and Dr. Laura, thank you once again for accepting our invitation. The stage is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much, Raquel, for that kind introduction. I'm very excited to be here today and to facilitate this conversation, which I think is a really important and interesting conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let's get started, because I think we have a lot to talk about today. And I want to kick us off by starting with a little bit of context. So, discussing where are we now, today, December 2023, with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion in business and in the world. There's been so much happening around the world in DEI, but where are we today? I'm going to ask Dr. Laura to kick us off and give us her perspectives on the context of where we're at today with DEI.
Sure, thanks, Jennifer. If we just look at the headlines, DEI is not faring so well. As we all know, in 2020, the murder of George Floyd in the US had a profound impact on the global conversation surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion. But in 2023, we now see a lot of headlines telling us that DEI is facing a great backsliding, that it's failed to deliver on its promise. While I agree on the backsliding and the failure to deliver, it's a lot more nuanced than that, and it differs by region. So if we look at Canada and Brazil specifically, both Canadian and Brazilian employers are increasingly recognizing the importance of DEI. There's a gap, though. In Canada, for example, 70% of employers express that they have a focus on improving DEI, but only 30% of them have multi-year DEI strategies in place. I'm not sure about the Brazilian numbers, but I believe it's similar. So regardless of what country or global region we're talking about, organizations really need to move beyond good intentions and start taking real action to address DEI in the workplace. And I see two major areas to focus in on, which I'm sure we'll hopefully talk about in more depth. But the things that most organizations can do better is treat DEI as a part of the core business strategy rather than an HR issue to be solved. And second is putting more effort on the E and the I before going full throttle on diversity. Equitable workplaces with inclusive cultures are the foundations that unleash the power of diversity. And so in a nutshell, I think that there's been an overfocus on diversity and not sufficient investment in time, resources, leadership focus, and on the E and the I. So I think that's where we are today, December 5th, 2023.
Very interesting. And I think I agree with you a lot, Dr. Laura, and we will definitely dig into those two gaps or areas where corporations can really focus some attention. But before we do that, I want to come to Anna to see, Anna, does this ring true for what you're seeing of the status of DEI in organizations in Brazil as well?
Yes, it does, Jennifer and Dr. Laura. Thanks again for the great context. And I think that one of the biggest similarities is that the initiatives related to the subject, like ERGs, who usually manages the DEI projects, are very often done by volunteers. So they're doing this in their extra time. It's not part of their regular job descriptions. And although the interest is positive, of course, usually is because of a personal reason, sometimes a relative or a friend, or even the person itself. It's part of that group, but they're more of enthusiasts than specialists with technical expertise to make decisions around implementing DEI projects in a more structured way inside companies. So I agree that companies should have a more structured area with budget, team, goals, and clear objectives in order to take out of the paper and actually put in the real world the DEI projects.
Yes, definitely very insightful. And I think, I see many parallels of what you're both talking about, even in my own organization at EDC, in the sense of, we've created ERGs We have dedicated some resources in some cases, but so much more needs to be done to really embed it throughout the corporate strategy. And there was a lot of momentum, and my sense is that things are definitely slowing down. We've had some great progress. So, I guess my next question to both of you is, from this great momentum over the last several years, some things have been put in place. Companies have invested, like you said, Dr. Lawyer, in expressing that DEI is important to them as organizations. But we're now seeing this pace slowing down. Or in some cases maybe stopped and moving on to different priorities. I guess my question is, do we think, why do we think this is? Do we, from what you've seen, do companies think they've done enough, or that enough is in place to keep things going? How do we prevent attention from DEI and the importance of it? And I think this is an opportunity to get more into what you were talking about, your point number one, making it part of strategy and strategic decision making. But, welcome your thoughts. Maybe I'll start with you, Anna, at this point to go into that point a little bit more deeper. Do we feel like, we've done enough? And how do we keep the momentum going?
Yeah, that's a big challenge. And I think from the Brazil perspective, we also have to take in consideration the different aspects of diversity and the different groups. For example, when we talk about gender or the age or the Black community, they have more developed projects rather than, for example, people with disabilities. So not only companies have their differences in the maturity of the subject within the company, but also we have different groups. And I think to keep up this momentum, I usually see from both from two sides. One is regulation, of course, is really important because some people need different arguments towards change. So some leaders can understand the benefits of investing in accessibility, in diversity and inclusion, and seeing all the good points of being more strategic, being more productive, being more creative. But others need some push of the fear of getting a fine. So of course, regulation is really important to keep up this movement of change. Actually, also here in Brazil, we have the Brazilian inclusion law, which is really great and really complete, but because it's rather new, from 2016, there's a lot of gray area still around the implementation, auditing, but it gives like a really good north on how things could go.
Interesting, yes. That idea of regulation, like for example in Canada as well, the Accessibilities Canada Act is coming in and helping to accelerate some of the changes to create inclusive environments is definitely happening once it becomes regulation. Are there any pitfalls around regulation? And I heard you talk about some of the perhaps challenges of implementation and making things happen. But Dr. Laura, maybe some of your thoughts on this slowing pace of change, and how do we, ensure that focus and attention remains on DEI strategies?
Sure. And Anna Clara mentioned that a great deal of what you're seeing in Brazil is very similar to what we see in Canada, and that it is largely run off the side of people's desks on a volunteer basis. And to me, that's a symptom of DEI not being treated as a true strategic business imperative. And so if I've worked a lot, and my partner and I in D101, we've worked a lot in mining and heavy industry, and we use operational excellence as the analogy. When I started out many years ago, safety was something that kind of happened off to the side. It was not integrated with the core business strategy. Now, fast forward many years later, and I would never expect to walk into a mining or other heavy industry site and not hear the CEO and the C-suite talking about safety in the context of the whole business. So it's now safe and reliable operations, also known as operational excellence, where we've seen organizations that integrate their DE&I into their core strategy. So it's owned by the board and the CEO. Very, very active involvement by C-suite leadership. DE&I planning, resourcing is built into the B plan cycle. It's built into the governance. So anywhere that senior mid-level leadership talks about business performance, they're talking about DEI performance. And then when you go to the front lines, they're talking about safety, plans of the day, whatever it is that your frontline people deliver. Those conversations, they're talking about DEI as well. So unless it's integrated into those systems and structures in the organization, then I fear it's going to continue to be what Clara described, off the side of the desk.
And just following on that a little bit, Dr. Laura, what do you think is preventing companies from making it part of the strategic priorities or the strategic plan? And how can we, like, are there ways that companies can think about how to make that part of their strategic priorities?
You know,
like, what are the blockers? What are the blockers here?
You know, I've done a lot of soul searching on that one, being in the consulting realm. And I do believe that one of the blockers are consultants. We've got a lot of well-meaning consultants out there who don't come from the core business strategy consultants or business strategy work. So we're supporting well-meaning HR organizations, and because DEI is understood to be about people, it ends up being owned in HR. And HR, I think, should be strategic partners. But if you think about inclusion is about the way people treat each other in those moments of truth, out where the work gets done. So unless operations people truly understand that this is a business issue, just like safety is, or it's a business and people issue coupled together, just like safety is, I don't think we're going to unlock it. So the way consultants have been supporting, the way organizations have been making it, and HR accountability, I think those are two very, very big blockers. So we need to switch to look at this through a business lens as opposed to a talent management lens.
Super interesting. And it makes me think of a parallel that I've been seeing lately with the rising talk about sustainability, et cetera. So if we're building sustainability into everything that we do, DEI is very much a part of sustainability as the social part of it. And if we want to fix climate change issues, energy transition issues, there's very much a human component. But at least in my experience, I'm seeing that not come to the forefront as much. We talk about clean technologies and, environmental issues that need to be addressed. But the social side of that has to come with that. Do either of you see the same thing, or have you seen some experience on how, companies have successfully brought DE in as part of overall sustainability strategies? Maybe Anna, do you want to comment? And then I'll give Dr. Laura a chance as well to comment on that.
Yes, and before my answer, I wanted to complement the last one about making the DEI part of a strategic plan about the blockers. I also believe that this mindset of thinking about investment in diversity, equity, and inclusion just from the HR is definitely one of the biggest blocks. And I believe that one opportunity to change this mindset is exactly talking about the business results, and not only the business results from the door in, like when you have a more inclusive hiring process, you will have a more diverse team, you will have a more productive team, you will have more creative solutions. There's all these benefits, but also the business perspective from the door out. So if you make a more accessible product or a more accessible service, you will be also broadening your potential consumers. So it could mean more results in sales. So it's I usually say that it's a win-win-win situation. Nobody loses when we invest properly in equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. That's actually a good point. We sometimes don't talk about accessibility more, but it's also part of the name, of course. And I believe that this change of mindset, that it can also be a business, it can bring business results from profitable way. It can help in this change of mindset.
Absolutely bang on. Thank you so much for those insights. I think, the more we see examples of that and showcasing examples. So a few things to summarize so far that we've heard is that we need to bring DEI more into mainstream strategic planning, not solely as an HR item. And that will impact not just internal employee satisfaction and productivity results, but in fact, we should be thinking about DEI and inclusion as it relates to our customers. And that's actually what my team at Export Development is charged with, is ensuring that our services and solutions are accessible to all customers that we're trying to reach. And that's not an easy fact, because it does start, and this is where I'm going to actually come back to Dr. Laura on your concept about building inclusion and inclusive environments, because people need to understand what that means in order to be able to design solutions, and be thinking, as we design products, services, be thinking about DEI in terms of who we're trying to reach in building more accessible products to sell, products and services. So maybe you can speak to us a little bit about that second lever that you were talking about at the beginning, Dr. Laura, about focusing more on the I and the E before we get to the D. I'd like to understand what you mean by that more.
Sure. So if you think about just some quick definitions that kind of might help clarify it, D is really about representation. You can, in many cases, you can count D. In some cases, you can actually see D in action. And inclusion is really about the social environment and how people are brought in and enabled to be full participants in the organization. And the E piece, how do we create an equitable workplace where we're looking at our policies and our programs to make sure that there are no unintended unwanted biases in there. And on the equity part, it's not just about how have we written the policies, but how are leaders, again, out where the work gets done, how are they implementing the policies? How do they understand the policies? And is there consistency throughout the organization of how people are treated? So I've got one client we're working with right now that in fact is taking their DE&I council and wrapping that in with their ESG, and their rationale for doing that was actually around their annual sustainability reports, so that their DEI now it's forcing them as a motivator, a contingency, to get them identifying the right data, talking about the right data, and sharing the right data. So if you've got equitable policies that are consistently implemented in a culture in which everybody has a share of voice and has that feeling of belonging, that's what it takes to unlock the promise of diversity. Without it, you may have a diverse workforce, but you're not leveraging it's not what people look like and where they come from. It's what are their experiences? How do they think about the world? It's that diversity of thought and experience that creates better cultures, generates some of the results Anna Clara was talking about. And I think, in fact, that a focus on accessibility will help unlock inclusion for everybody else, because when you look at accessibility, you have to audit your environment. You have to talk to your people and find out what are the barriers. What are the accessibility barriers? And if you're building physical and social environments for people with disabilities, also building environments that are going to work for everybody else. And I think you're highlighting the mindsets and the behavior changes that people need in order to make inclusion work across the board.
Super interesting. And it sounds like, hearing you speak about that, it sounds really difficult to implement. Like, how do you build that kind of, these consistently applied, like an environment within a corporation that consistently applies policies and programs that have eliminated bias, and that, like, is that training? How do you build that culture? Have you seen examples of companies that have done this, and what's that process look like?
So the process to me always starts with a conversation with the executive saying, what are you trying to accomplish as an organization? And that's your bottom line business results, but it's also about what kind of a culture do you want in your organization, and what's your human perspective on what you're trying to achieve. So this is about numbers and it's about narratives. Once we understand where the organization is and where it wants to go, then we can start talking about the specifics. So the first thing I would do is, let's do an audit on your policies and programs. And there are people who specialize in this. I have people on my team who can go into an organization and in a couple of weeks do an audit and tell them, here's where you're doing really well in your policies, here are your opportunities, here's what needs to be rewritten. So that's kind of thing number one. But where it gets implemented, now we're talking about human behavior in the workplace. And there's a little bit of training, but it really is about helping leaders, starting with the senior team. They provide a model, they set the tone. What are we would say, for your culture, what does inclusion look like? What will people be doing and saying on a daily basis that reflects inclusion? What do you not want them doing that we're going to help people stop doing? And then we develop some ways of helping all leaders understand, what's my personal behavior change? What kind of support will I get? Do I get a coach? Do I get a peer coach? How do we talk about behavior change? And we need to give leaders permission to go out and try new things and maybe not be perfect at them to start with. And we want to combine that. And I don't want to give the impression that this is a totally top-down thing. This is also where I think the employee groups, such as the ERGs, can have such a huge impact, because they understand the organization at a very grassroots level, and they understand what people need and what they don't need. So they can influence and help and support. So yeah, it is big and it sounds kind of hard, but if we chunk it up, I'd say, what are your objectives? Let's look at your policies. let's tackle mindsets and behaviors out in the workplace, and through that shape up a new culture of inclusion. And again, that's what unlocks that promise of diversity.
Yeah,
Amazing.
and I wanted to compliment also
Yes.
that we kind of like always come back to the part of the structure, the need to be a really to have a structure with budget and timeline and people dedicated to think exclusively on these processes, because I liked a lot of what Dr. Laura said about implementing on a daily basis, because I think that's the real challenge, because we can have guidelines and rules and good practices, but actually putting them in real life in a day-to-day basis on an email or a meeting, and actually implementing is the real change, when people understand that it's part of their daily lives. And I also want to add that a really good strategy to amplify and to make this change really legit is to involve different professionals that are part of the different groups of diversity uh, within this whole process, like putting everyone in the table to make this decision making and to design these processes together, because that really gives like the how can I say this in English? Like it brings the legitimacy of each group. So, for example, a person with a disability can bring some inputs that, although a person without disability, although is very an expert on the subject, may not have. So, making sure that this team, and I also agree that it should be at least partially top down, but also from down up on the daily life, but bringing real people, experts and professionals from each group to design this collectively together will potentially be better for the final result of this whole culture creation and culture management.
Absolutely. Like we hear it all the time, you know, these processes and policies and everything shouldn't be created for groups of people without the representatives from those groups of people, right? So bringing the representation into the design process absolutely is the winning formula for creating that future culture that we're looking for. I want to shift a little bit to how, in the work that both of you do, you set KPIs that are meaningful to really measure. And I've been hearing a lot lately about, you know, different things. You can measure outcomes, which I think you both have spoken about, is the things that you can count or that you can see. And maybe that's why people focus on the D first, Dr. Laura, because it's easy to measure versus, so that's outcomes versus impact. And that seems a little more difficult to grasp or to measure, and it's also longer term. So, you know, in your work and in what you're seeing, you know, corporations do to embrace DEI strategies, what's the best way to approach KPIs to measure whether the strategies are winning or losing? What can help guide people as they're doing this work? I don't know who wants to start first with that question, if you've got some suggestions, but I'll ask you both on the same question. So Dr. Laura, maybe with you first.
Sure. And that's exactly why I start the conversation with the executive team saying, what do you want to accomplish? And through that discussion, we get a notion of what are your diversity goals in mining in Canada, for example. It's largely about Indigenous peoples, women, and skilled immigrants. And so, okay, we've nailed down 3 groups of people that you want to increase representation within your mining organizations. And you're right, Jen, for those D tends to be the easiest because they're numbers and you can count them. Inclusion is probably the hardest because it's about culture and it's about behaviors. But we can still, if we can define those, we can count them. So that's where the question of, okay, what is your inclusive culture? What does it need to look like? And we'll do a from to scenario. Here's what your culture currently looks like. And here are sort of the prevailing norms and behaviors. And what needs to be done differently? What does your inclusive culture look like? What are the new behaviors? And we can actually count them. It's going to be a little bit more, sometimes like a thumb in the wind. But the key is to have a reliable enough source of information that you can have conversations and you can make some determination, are we getting better, staying the same, or getting worse? And so there's going to be no, I don't think I could walk into an organization and say, okay, here are 6 things on DE&I to measure, now go do it. But the key is to have your critical few measures that are going to help advance to your vision of where you want your organization to go, and then have a methodology for talking about them from the C-suite right to the front levels, and engaging your mid and frontline people to come up with their own metrics and their own measures. Just as long as everybody is accountable to the same vision, they can come up with measures that make sense for their own part of the organization.
So what I heard you say is defining, like if we want to measure something, we need to define it and picture what it looks like to then be able to measure that, even if it's a behavior. Anna, please, over to you for your input.
Yeah, and I'll, as Dr. Laura was talking, I remember that we also have to keep in mind that sometimes results are kind of like not tangible. It can be a really concrete information, but it's not because like we cannot actually know the exact number. That is not a really good result or a result itself. In order to illustrate that, I would like to share one of the results that we have for putting the communication accessibility for Burger King campaign here in Brazil. We did the audio description of an advertising that was on Open TV. It was the first time that a commercial was audio described in the history of Brazilian TV. And for a large part of the group of people with visual impairments, the man in the commercial was wearing the crown, like a cardboard crown from the Burger King. And a lot of people did not know about the existence of the crown. They were like, why there's a crown? Why is he using a crown? So it's a really huge part of branding, reputation, of branding construction, like from generations. And it was not actually getting in for a large part of potential consumers. So it's really, we could not know how many people discovered because of the commercial, but that feedback itself was a really important piece of information for the company to make other strategic decisions. And so just to share and to keep in mind that sometimes, especially with accessibility, the results are not actually cannot be actually measured, but we can have important feedback for implementing next projects, and also for convincing the leadership that it's a really good result and it has benefits. So while we were saying, like, broadening the audience and building a more positive image towards consumers and stakeholders, not only final consumers but other stakeholders as well. So yeah, that sometimes the results can be very tangible, sometimes not, but it doesn't mean that they are not useful.
Very, very interesting. And I mean, I can share what our organization has done as well as just another example to be able to measure how we move the needle on behaviors and things like that is we issue employee engagement surveys, and with various different questions aiming to understand how employees are feeling from a DEI perspective, and creating almost a bit of a formula that our Chief Diversity Officer has coined the inclusion index. And then we set targets around how, like, can we move the needle on that belonging index as measured by a periodic survey, engagement survey of employees. So I do think there are different ways creatively to measure success of actions that companies are taking to change their culture. It's not easy and it takes time, and I think it needs to be given the time to show the ultimate impacts, but also to measure that. I just want to pause at this point in time to let our audience on the line know. I hope you're finding this a very engaging conversation as much as I am, but we would welcome any questions that anybody from the audience has. So feel free to use the Q&A function in the Zoom platform to please enter any questions that you might have for Dr. Laura or Anna, and I'll be happy to pose those questions. So I guess I want to answer some questions. Is like, what do we have to look forward to when we get it right? Like, what? Why is this so important? We started by saying there was so much momentum. We had these different movements like Me Too, the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, and we had momentum. A bunch of activity happened, and now we're sort of leaning towards other priorities. But what do we have to look forward to when we get it right? Are there, examples that you've seen, either of you, of leaders that have created truly inclusive workplace cultures, and what benefits are they seeing once that's created? Maybe Anna, I'll start with you this time.
Well, I'm actually I'm optimist. I really like to believe that the future it's brighter than the actual nowadays context. I think that the awareness of all the benefits and all the good arguments that we mentioned today, it's an ongoing process, of course. So it's not like the difference won't happen from one day to another. We understand that there's it needs time to actually happen. But I believe that this awareness in leaderships of companies is growing. I like to believe it will grow even more. But I also like to believe that the next generations, the younger generations, are becoming like more more intolerant for discrimination. So they will demand, they will make decisions. They are more aware when they choose a company that they want to work from, or a company that they will buy from. So I think they will this next generation will also incentivize and maybe force the workplaces to be more inclusive if they want to attract those professionals for their companies, and or if thinking about them as consumers also, they will choose from one company to another if it understands that it has a more ethical, sustainable, and inclusive strategy and workplace and products and services, rather than choosing from a company that they know it's not good for the environment, and it discriminates people. So I like to believe that these external forces will also and accelerate the process of awareness and actual change.
Wonderful. Would you add anything, Dr. Laura?
I totally agree with Anna. And even if you don't think it's the right thing to do, I mean, that's my starting point. It is the right thing to do. And when you are improving employee experiences, you get better health and well-being, which translates into our homes and communities as well as our workplaces. But we also know that translates into more innovation, more productivity. When you get that diverse thinking, you have better risk management, you have better decision making. That translates into everything from improved market share, profitability, time to market, customer relations. The bottom line impact of having a highly engaged and innovative culture, I think there's no dispute. And when we look at what's going on currently, what I didn't mention in the beginning with DEI is if you look at global labor pools, we're facing some pretty dire futures, retirements of boomers, lower birth rates. The way to keep Western economies going, we need to bring in newcomers because we don't have enough population replacement. So, and that circles back to Anna's last point about people making choices about where they work. And that's going to become more and more important as it becomes, as the labor pool challenges continue.
Excellent points. Talent retention, talent attraction, and even customer, like Anna was mentioning, attraction is really reliant in the future on our corporations' approaches to all things around the SDGs. There is a question that has come in from the audience, but before I get to that question, I would like to just ask you both for a little bit of your insight on international context. Today we're talking about Canada, Brazil, but nowadays companies are often operating globally, and in different countries, receptivity to DEI is different. And the approaches are very different. So for organizations that might be straddling multiple countries, multiple cultures, is there anything for those groups to be aware of when implementing DEI? Some of those cultural nuances of doing business across borders, whether that's with customers across borders and managing those different mindsets, but also maybe you've got teams located around the world, and how do you build that culture in an international context? Maybe you can comment a little bit on that, and I'll start with Dr. Laura, and then Anna, give you an opportunity as well.
Sure, and it's a really important question. It's both about different cultures in which the organization operates, and it's the laws within different countries, regions as well. So I would say start at the enterprise level. And so again, I'm going to go back to that question, who do you want to be? What do you want to achieve? And have that consistent vision and narrative from that corporate enterprise level. But applications must be local. And so, for example, in France, you can't even ask the demographic questions. Even if you promise everything's anonymous. So you've got to figure out what's the workaround. There's no better team to figure out how they're going to do it than the team that's located in France with the workforce. So start at the enterprise level vision, local applications, make sure you've got connectivity between the enterprise and the local so that you don't have anybody at the local level going rogue. But they are able to define their from to scenarios and their implementation roadmaps and methodologies. So it works in their local scene, and collectively around the globe, it's going to add up to success. One company I can think of that has done that very well is BHP Billiton, the global mining giant. You can go online and look at their story, and starting with their board and executive management and then working through their local enterprises. I think that's exactly what they've done.
Very good. Anna, anything you would add, given your perspective and your work?
Just again, agreeing with Dr. Laura and adding the one perspective about accessibility that is very important also in this regional and local implementation, especially when we talk about like translation about languages. So it's really important that we take in consideration, again, the structure, the time, the budget, to have in the planning of implementing the projects and making this demographic design and getting these informations, that we have to consider accessibility features regarding communication. So, for example, here in Latin America, for sign language, there's kind of like accents or difference between Brazilian sign language and Argentinian sign language and Chilean sign language. So it's important that we have the attention to these details that are not details, they are very important. But just a general reminder that accessibility can and should be part of the whole planning process for implementing DEI projects, especially when we're thinking about when we are thinking about different countries. You can have like vocabulary changes, that some term here in Brazil can be that is totally okay in Portuguese can be perceived as a not so right term in another language. So we also have to have that kind of thought in mind.
Absolutely. It's a reminder too to make sure that those you're bringing people in from the different areas of the business in creating the solutions or building the approach to accessibility. And even just, I think, even if we can create some simple questions that we ask ourselves every time, who are we building for and who's potentially excluded from what we're building, I think, just helps us at least think about some of those little, what we might call details, but that are so important to make sure that we catch up front. Okay, the time is flying. We do have some questions here, and one of them relates to, the fear that as we head into an economic downturn, that those resources, the capacity and the budgets required for DEI work could be sacrificed. And how do we ensure that the benefits for this work remain top of mind? Like I think we've talked about, make it part of the overall business strategy. But again, like in an environment where people think, okay, we've invested in that and maybe we've done enough, how do we continue to highlight the benefits to the bottom line, or how can short-term costing, how do we make the linkage to the short-term investments to the longer-term impacts and benefits? Any thoughts from either of you on that? Especially as we, enter into an economic scenario where prioritization for budgets will be harder and tighter. Is it more of the same? Like, it's really got to be built in.
It's got to be built in, and you absolutely have to have the focus on inclusive cultures. So diversity on its own. Actually, Bain & Company just published new research where they were able to unpack focus on diversity alone, focus on inclusion alone, and companies that focus on both. If all you're doing is focusing on D, you might get a bit of a lift. If all you're doing is focusing on I, so you're not changing your diversity profile, but you're going for a more inclusive culture, that's going to give you more of a lift. But if you focus on representation and inclusion, that's going to give you at least double the lift from just focusing on diversity alone. So the numbers pan out. And again, where many organizations have gone wrong is over focusing on D, which doesn't produce the results. So they say, well, this isn't working, let's go on to something else. Those that focus on inclusive culture change to unlock the promise, that's where I would say, put your money in that. And that's going to pay off.
Okay. I see nodding head there, Anna. Do you want to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add because it's exactly that, what Dr. Laura said. And I also usually like to bring the planning, the importance of planning ahead the budget and the resources, because, and especially when we talk about accessibility, usually accessibility is the first thing to be crossed off the list of priorities and lose the budget. And that's usually the argument. Oh, it wasn't on my planning, it wasn't on my annual budget, so I don't have it, so I won't do it. Oh, sorry. And I say, okay, you have one shot of using that argument. You cannot use it 2 times, because if you didn't put it on your planning on the first time because you didn't know or something, okay, but you cannot not plan again. It would be an intentional error. It will be an intentional misuse of the budget and the strategic planning for the company. So in that case, I think that the using long-term, medium-term, and short-term, and balance those objectives can be also an strategy. So, okay, this year I can do this, and next year I can do this and that, and the next year, and from so on.
Yes, and I think I love that because yes, if it gets deprioritized, then it's intentional. If it's done 2 years in a row, and I think that's also where the benefits to regulation might help out, right? If it's required and you need to hit certain milestones every year, then that can help make the argument for ensuring that it's a budget and a strategic priority. We're so running out of time, but I guess I'll leave it on trying to combine, a last question that I'll put to both of you from our audience. And I guess this, is something I've seen too. We see that, many critics claim that DEI is primarily a political initiative to look good, but it's not really sustainable, or that it doesn't actually boost the economy, but is more of a marketing strategy, right? So maybe quickly you can give us, your 30 seconds or less. What is that one argument that folks can take to their executive teams that will knock it out of the park and convince them that investment in DEI is worth it? Start with you, Dr. Laura, and then we'll give the last word to Anna in 30
sure.
seconds or less.
If you are over focusing on D and you have an event based, you put big promises out there, you're doing like a monthly event on this and that, and it's run off the sides of volunteer desks, then chances are you're in the performative realm. And that's really not going to work. However, I mean, the data are irrefutable that it pays off if you do it right. And yeah, E&I is harder work than D, but if you do it right, it pays off incredibly in your bottom line, in your health and well-being of the people in your organization, in your social impact in the communities you serve. So to say, if you're doing it right, it's not performative, it has a huge impact, and it's well worth the investment.
So my key takeaway there is get the data and use the data when you approach the executive team, and and the data will speak for itself. Any last words, Anna?
Yeah, actually just echoing that is always only good points around investing in accessibility, equity, and diversity and inclusion. So if there's a executive thinking and if you should invest or not, it will be good for your product, it will be good for your service, it will be good for your internal culture, it will be good for your image, for your stakeholders and your public. So then again, it's a win-win-win situation. Nobody loses when we invest in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility.
Wonderful. What a great way to end. Thank you both so much. And I will pass it back to Raquel to close us off.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Oh my God, so insightful, all this discussion. And I was relying on it because I am an immigrant, international entrepreneur. And I can see here when I'm working with other international entrepreneurs and inside business incubators, how rich it is when you have different cultures and backgrounds. And you are in the middle of a discussion or a negotiation, and everyone brings to the table new thoughts, new perspectives. It's really something that helps the organization. So I really agree with all of you, and it was excellent discussion. Thank you very much. Super relevant, important that all the companies be aware about this. I thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you very much, Dr. Laura, Anna. Thank you for all the attendees that were here today live and for the ones that are watching us later. We are going to have our recording available on YouTube in the next few days. So anyone that wants to recommend to watch, please join us later. And follow us on social media to stay informed in our upcoming events and our next discussions about diversity and inclusivity. Thank you, all of you. Have a wonderful day. And let's move forward and make the changes.
Thank you.
Thank you.